The Hidden Bond, a journey from heartbreak to hope. In life, sometimes the unexpected turns lead us to a place of healing and hope. Rachel thought she had lost everything after a tragic accident, but a mysterious connection to a child she never knew existed offers her a chance for a new beginning. This heartwarming and emotional story takes you on a journey of love, loss, and the power of second chances. As Rachel uncovers secrets from the past, she discovers that even in the darkest moments, life has a way of surprising us with unexpected blessings. If you've ever felt like life took you down a path you weren't expecting, you'll find this story inspiring and relatable. Don't forget to subscribe, share with friends, and join our community of readers who believe in the beauty of new beginnings. The morning sun gently seeped into Rachel's apartment, warming the rooms with a golden and comforting light. She woke up early that day, feeling an unusual lightness, as if her heart was more peaceful and hopeful than ever before. As she stood up, she noticed something different inside her, an indescribable feeling that made her smile to herself while still standing barefoot at the edge of the bed. She headed to the kitchen, where she prepared her breakfast with her mind elsewhere. Rachel was distracted, but not with worries. On the contrary, there was a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. Life with Michael was good, filled with affection and companionship, but lately she felt like something was missing. Maybe a change, a new beginning. After having breakfast and getting ready for the day, Rachel decided to take a pregnancy test. It was something she had been putting off for days, but now her intuition urged her to act. When she saw the 2 pink lines appear on the test, her heart almost stopped. Tears filled her eyes, and for a moment, she just stood there in the bathroom, silently absorbing the enormity of the discovery. She was pregnant. Rachel sat on the living room sofa, still stunned by the revelation, but her mind was already making plans. She needed to tell Michael in a special way, something that would reflect the joy she was feeling in that moment. He had always been a caring and loving man, and she knew he would be thrilled with the news. She decided she couldn't wait. Michael deserved to know as soon as possible. When Michael came home that evening, Rachel greeted him with a mysterious smile. He noticed the difference in her mood right away. "What's going on?" he asked, curiously, as he took off his shoes in the hallway. "I have a surprise for you," she said, leading him by the hand into the living room. There, on the coffee table, was a small gift box with a delicate bow. Michael looked at her with a playful and curious smile before picking up the package and starting to open it. Inside, he found a pair of white baby shoes. For a second, Michael was silent, processing what it meant. Then his eyes widened, and he looked at Rachel, who nodded with tears in her eyes. "We're going to have a baby, Michael," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Michael couldn't contain his laughter and tears that came simultaneously. He hugged her tightly, lifting her off the ground in an explosion of happiness. The idea of becoming parents and building a family together seemed like the perfect next chapter in their story. After they calmed down, they spent the rest of the night planning the future. They talked about names, how they would tell their friends and family, and even how they would decorate the baby's room. The love and joy they felt were palpable, as if a new energy had taken over their lives. The next day, Michael suggested they take a trip to celebrate the big news. Rachel loved the idea. They were financially comfortable, and a trip to the coast would be the perfect setting to celebrate this new beginning. The trip would be short, just a weekend, but enough to recharge and start dreaming about the future. On Saturday afternoon, they hit the road toward the beach. The drive was peaceful, with the sound of the waves mixing with the laughter and conversations in the car. The sky was clear, the weather mild, and everything seemed in harmony. However, on the way back home, after a seaside dinner and a last stroll along the sand, the night grew heavy, and fatigue began to set in on Michael. Rachel noticed he was blinking more slowly and suggested they stop somewhere to rest. But Michael insisted they were almost home and could rest once they got there. Then, in the silence of the night, while Rachel dozed off in the passenger seat, the inevitable happened. Michael, exhausted, lost control of the car for just a brief moment, but it was enough for the car to veer off the road and crash violently into an embankment. The impact was devastating. Rachel was thrown against the dashboard, and the last thing she saw before losing consciousness was the image of Michael, motionless at the wheel, his eyes closed. Darkness took over, and silence reigned, interrupted only by the distant sound of the ocean and the approaching sirens. Rachel opened her eyes slowly, feeling the bright, white light surrounding her. Everything seemed out of focus. The white walls and indistinct shapes danced before her confused eyes. The weight on her body and the pain radiating from every limb made her moan in weakness. She tried to move, but her body felt heavy, pinned to the bed. It was then that she noticed the rhythmic sound of a heart monitor beside her, matching the rapid beating of her heart. She was in a hospital. A nurse approached, noticing that Rachel had woken up. Her steps were hurried but gentle, and her expression was one of concern. Rachel tried to speak, but her voice came out weak, an incomprehensible murmur. "Calm down, Ms. Rachel. You're safe now," said the nurse, adjusting the pillows around her. "You've been in an accident, but we're taking care of you." The word accident echoed in Rachel's mind like a distant, meaningless sound. She tried to remember what had happened, but everything was blurry, like a bad dream that dissolves upon waking. Her mind searched for answers, but all it found was emptiness. "Michael," she finally murmured, managing to say his name. "Where is Michael?" The nurse hesitated, her eyes revealing more than her words could hide. "We'll call the doctor to speak with you. He can explain everything." Rachel felt a pang of fear grow inside her. Something was wrong. She knew it. She tried to sit up, but a sharp pain in her abdomen forced her to stop. When she looked down, she saw that her stomach was bandaged, and a wave of panic washed over her. Something was terribly wrong. Shortly afterward, the doctor entered the room, wearing an expression Rachel would never forget, a mixture of compassion and sorrow in his eyes that could only mean one thing. "Ms. Rachel, my name is Dr. Williams. You were in a severe accident, and I'm deeply sorry, but I have to tell you what happened." Rachel's world began to spin. Every word that came out of the doctor's mouth felt like a sentence. He explained that the car had veered off the road and crashed head-on into an embankment. Michael had died on impact, and the paramedics who arrived couldn't do anything to save him. Rachel, on the other hand, had been found unconscious with multiple fractures and internal injuries. "Your condition was critical, but you're a strong woman. You fought to survive." The doctor paused before continuing, as if searching for the right words. "However, due to the severity of your injuries, we couldn't save the baby." Rachel's world shattered. Her body trembled as she tried to process what she had just heard. Michael was dead. The baby, the tiny being she had just started to love, was gone too. She felt herself drowning in an abyss of pain so deep that everything around her became insignificant, as if the very air had been sucked out of the room. Rachel couldn't breathe. She couldn't cry. Her body was in shock. Her mind refused to accept reality. She tried to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she let out a low, primal cry that echoed through the room like the sound of a heart breaking. The doctor continued speaking, but she could barely hear him. His words were a distant hum, muffled by the pain that now consumed her entire being. He mentioned that her uterus had been severely damaged in the accident, and that, to save her life, they had to remove it. The doctor's final words sealed Rachel's fate. "Unfortunately, you won't be able to have children anymore." Rachel felt as if her world had ended right there. The weight of the news crushed any strength she had left. She lost Michael, she lost the baby, And now, the dream of becoming a mother had been ripped away from her forever. Night fell over the hospital, and with it, Rachel found herself alone in her pain. The hours dragged on, each second a cruel reminder of the new reality she would have to face. The hospital room felt increasingly suffocating, as if the walls were closing in around her, slowly choking her. She tried to find a reason, any reason to keep going. But all she could feel was an immense emptiness, a pain so deep it seemed impossible to bear. Rachel wondered if she would ever be able to rise from this fall, if life would ever make sense again. But for now, she could only think of one thing. Everything she loved, everything she had lived for, had been taken from her in the blink of an eye. The days following Rachel's discharge from the hospital were shrouded in a dense fog of pain and confusion. The apartment she and Michael had shared, once so full of life, now felt like a silent tomb where memories danced like shadows in every corner. The bed that once held the two of them now seemed vast and empty, a constant reminder of what she had lost. Rachel spent her days wandering aimlessly around the apartment, disoriented, unable to find a purpose. Michael's belongings, his clothes, his photographs, everything around her seemed to mock her pain, constantly reminding her that he was gone forever. At night, she barely slept, and when she did, she was haunted by nightmares. In her dreams, Michael appeared shrouded in shadows, his face always partially obscured. He seemed to want to say something, but the words never reached her, leaving her more confused and distressed. At first, these dreams terrified her. But as the days passed, Rachel began to notice something different in them. Michael seemed to be trying to guide her, but where? What was he trying to show her? These questions began to consume her thoughts, pulling her further away from reality. The sleepless nights, the lack of answers, and the constant pain started to erode Rachel's sanity. She found herself talking to herself, looking for signs of Michael everywhere. The loneliness was crushing. At one point, she felt like she was on the brink of completely losing her mind. The grief wasn't just for the loss of Michael and the baby, but also for the woman she had once been. It was during one of those sleepless nights, when the silence of the apartment became unbearable, that Rachel decided she needed to get out. She needed air, she needed something to reconnect her with the real world, to pull her out of the endless cycle of pain and despair. The next morning, Rachel left the apartment with no clear destination, only an urgent need to escape the memories that suffocated her. The streets were busy, life continued as usual, oblivious to the suffering she carried. As she walked, she felt even more isolated, as if she were separated from the rest of the world by an invisible barrier. Then, during her aimless walk, her eyes were drawn to a small, discreet sign, St. Clare's Orphanage. The words stood out as if they were illuminated by their own light, calling to her in a way she couldn't ignore. Rachel stopped in front of the entrance, hesitant. The idea of entering an orphanage, of being surrounded by children, seemed overwhelming, especially after everything she had lost. But something inside her pushed her forward, a force she couldn't explain. When she finally crossed the gates of the orphanage, she was greeted by a sense of calm, almost as if the place had been waiting for her. The sound of children's laughter echoed in the distance, bringing a lightness that sharply contrasted with the darkness she carried. Rachel felt a tightness in her chest, a mix of sadness and hope, but also something more, something indefinable. Inside the orphanage, she was welcomed by Laura, the director, a middle-aged woman who exuded a serenity that immediately soothed Rachel. Laura, with her warm smile, gave Rachel a brief tour of the place, showing her the dormitories, classrooms, and the playground where the children played. Rachel tried to focus on Laura's words, but her mind was distant, still trapped in the disturbing images of her dreams about Michael. As she walked through the orphanage's hallways, Rachel felt an inexplicable connection to the place. It was as if something there was calling to her, something she couldn't yet comprehend. Every child she saw, every smile that crossed her path, touched a sensitive chord within her, awakening feelings she thought she had lost forever. However, Rachel wasn't ready to understand what it all meant. At the end of the visit, she thanked Laura and promised to return. Something about that place was pulling her back, something she knew she needed to explore but wasn't ready for just yet. As she left the orphanage, Rachel felt a slight relief, as if a small thread of hope had been planted in her heart. She returned home that day a little different. Though the pain was still present, there was now a seed of curiosity, a sense that perhaps, just perhaps, something new could emerge from the ashes of her shattered life. The dreams of Michael continued, but now she felt that they were guiding her toward something greater, something yet to come. The sound of children's laughter echoed through the orphanage's playground, a joyful melody that contrasted with the weight in Rachel's heart. She had returned to St. Clair's orphanage a few days after her first visit, unable to ignore the silent call the place had on her. Laura, the director, welcomed her again with her warm smile, noticing that something in Rachel had changed since the last visit, as if she were searching for something, or perhaps someone. As Laura led Rachel through the halls once more, talking about the children's routines and activities, Rachel barely focused on the words. Her mind was scattered, lost in thoughts about Michael, her recurring dreams, and the persistent feeling that something bigger was happening. She wasn't sure what she was hoping to find there, but she felt she was on the right path. As they approached the playground, where some children were playing happily, something made Rachel stop suddenly. Her gaze was drawn to a corner where a boy of about 8 years old was sitting, watching the other children with a serious, almost introspective expression. He was alone, surrounded by a silence that seemed to contradict the energy around him. There was something familiar about that boy, something that made Rachel's heart race in a way she couldn't explain. She slowly approached, as if guided by an invisible force, while Laura continued speaking without noticing the sudden change in Rachel's behavior. When the boy finally looked up and his eyes met Rachel's, the world seemed to stop. The impact was immediate. Jacob, as Laura casually called him, was the spitting image of Michael. His features, the shape of his face, even the intensity in his gaze, everything about him reminded Rachel of Michael in an almost supernatural way. Rachel felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. How was this possible? Was it just her mind, still engulfed in grief, playing tricks on her? Or was there something deeper and more mysterious behind that resemblance? Jacob, noticing Rachel's fixed gaze, looked down shyly, unsure how to react to the sudden attention. Rachel tried to speak, but the words seemed to have been ripped from her throat. She was paralyzed between disbelief and fear, struggling against the wave of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Laura noticed the interaction and smiled gently. "That's Jacob. He's a sweet boy," she hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Jacob lost his mother during childbirth and never knew his father. It's been hard for him, but he's a strong kid." Rachel couldn't take her eyes off Jacob. Laura's words echoed in her mind, mixing with her own chaotic thoughts. The resemblance between Jacob and Michael was so striking that it seemed impossible it could be mere coincidence. And if there was something more, something she needed to discover? Part of Rachel, still immersed in pain and mourning, feared she was projecting her emotions onto this innocent child. What if she was just seeing what she wanted to see? But the connection she felt with Jacob was undeniable, a bond she couldn't explain but also couldn't ignore. It was as if her entire being was screaming for her to pay attention, not to miss what was right in front of her. For the rest of the visit, Rachel kept Jacob in her sight, discreetly watching him as he interacted with the other children. With each look, each movement, the feeling that he might be related to Michael grew inside her, forming a knot of uncertainty and curiosity she knew she would need to unravel. When it was time to leave, Rachel felt an internal resistance, as if part of her wanted to stay. Before leaving, she approached Laura and, with a wavering voice, asked more about Jacob. Laura, always kind, told her everything she knew, that Jacob had been brought to the orphanage as a baby after his mother's death, and that no information about the father had been found. Rachel left the orphanage with a heavy heart and a mind in turmoil. The resemblance between Jacob and Michael, the lack of information about the boy's father, the disturbing dreams about Michael, everything seemed to intertwine into a mystery she felt an urgent need to solve. That night, alone in her apartment, Rachel reflected on everything she had seen and felt that day. The idea that Jacob could somehow be connected to Michael seemed crazy, but the connection she felt was too real to ignore. She knew she couldn't rest until she discovered the truth. Rachel wasted no time. The curiosity and restlessness that had consumed her since meeting Jacob drove her to act quickly. The next morning, after a restless, sleepless night, she picked up the phone and made a call that would change the course of her life. She hired Samuel, a private investigator known for his discretion and efficiency, and arranged a meeting to discuss what she had discovered so far. Samuel's office was in an old building downtown, a place that exuded an air of mystery and hidden secrets. When Rachel entered, she was greeted by Samuel himself, a middle-aged man with a rugged appearance and sharp eyes that seemed capable of uncovering any secret. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Rachel got straight to the point, recounting the story of Jacob and the disturbing resemblance he had to Michael. "I know this might sound crazy, Samuel, but something tells me there's more to this story than it seems," Rachel said, trying to organize her thoughts. "I need to know the truth. I need to know who this boy is and why he looks so much like Michael." Samuel listened intently, his expressions revealing little of what he thought. After a few minutes, he nodded slowly. "I'll start by investigating the available records on Jacob," he said, taking out a notebook. "If he was brought to the orphanage, there should be some documentation, even if minimal. I'll see what I can find out." Rachel thanked him and left Samuel's office with a heavy heart but a spark of hope. If there was something to discover, Samuel would find it. Meanwhile, she would have to deal with the increasingly intense dreams that continued to haunt her every night. The following days were marked by an agonizing wait. Rachel found herself increasingly immersed in memories of Michael, as if her mind was trying to show her something she still couldn't understand. The dreams became more vivid and detailed. Michael appeared in familiar places, but always shrouded in a mist that made it hard to see his face clearly. He seemed agitated, as if he wanted to tell her something important, but the words never reached her. One night, the dream was different. Michael was in their bedroom, the same one where they had shared so many conversations and laughter. He seemed closer, more real. Rachel approached him, but before she could touch him, he whispered something that made her wake up abruptly. "Find the truth." Rachel woke up startled, her heart pounding. The phrase echoed in her mind, so clear and urgent that she knew she couldn't ignore it. Michael was trying to tell her something, and she was determined to find out what it was. A few days later, Samuel got in touch. He had made progress in the investigation and wanted to meet with her to discuss what he had discovered. Rachel went to the meeting with a mix of anxiety and hope, trying to prepare herself for what she might hear. In Samuel's office, he presented the initial findings of his investigation. The records at the orphanage confirmed the basic story that Laura had told. Jacob had been brought to the orphanage as a baby after his mother's death during childbirth. There was no information about the father, and the few available documents indicated that Jacob was just another one of many children without a family at the institution. "So far, there's nothing that directly links Jacob to Michael," Samuel said in a professional and restrained tone. "But there are some gaps in the records. The orphanage received Jacob from a local hospital, but there aren't many details about his mother or any close relatives. I'll keep investigating these loose ends." Rachel listened carefully, but her mind was focused on something else, the resemblance. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something beyond the records, something that hadn't yet been revealed. Samuel, Do you think it's possible that this resemblance is just a coincidence?" Rachel asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Samuel looked at her with a thoughtful gaze. "Coincidences happen, but they're rare. What you've described is, at the very least, intriguing. I'll dig deeper. There might be something that hasn't come to light yet. In the meantime, I suggest you keep observing Jacob's behavior. Sometimes, the answers are where we least expect them." Rachel nodded, knowing that the wait would be agonizing. What else could be hidden in Jacob's story? And why did she feel so strongly that Michael was trying to communicate with her, even after his death? The questions kept piling up, and Rachel knew she wouldn't rest until they were all answered. The following days were long and filled with tension. Rachel tried to distract herself with daily tasks, but her mind kept returning to Jacob and the mystery surrounding him. The nights were even harder, with the dreams of Michael becoming almost real, as if he were right beside her, whispering secrets she still couldn't fully understand. The days leading up to the revelation were marked by almost unbearable tension. Rachel lived in a state of constant anxiety, her mind torn between hope and fear of what was to come. Samuel had suggested doing a DNA test, an idea that initially seemed absurd but soon became the only way to calm the doubts consuming Rachel. The collection process was meticulous. Through his connections, Samuel had obtained permission to exhume Michael's remains, a decision Rachel didn't take lightly. The thought of disturbing Michael's rest tormented her, but the need to know the truth drove her forward. The collection of Jacob's samples was done discreetly during an outing Rachel had arranged. They went for ice cream together, and at that moment, seeing Jacob's innocent smile, Rachel almost backed out. The idea that he could be Michael's son and that all this would bring up secrets from the past terrified her. The days following the DNA collection were a silent torture. Rachel spent sleepless nights, haunted by increasingly intense dreams of Michael, where he appeared closer, more real, but still mysterious, as if he were on the verge of revealing something crucial, but always interrupted by Rachel's own consciousness, which woke her up. Finally, Samuel scheduled a meeting to reveal the results. Rachel arrived at his office with her heart racing, a mix of fear and hope intertwining in her mind. Sitting across from Samuel, she noticed the gravity in his expression, something that made her hold her breath. "Rachel, the DNA test results are in," Samuel began, his voice calm and controlled, but it didn't hide the significance of what he was about to say. "Jacob is, indeed, Michael's son." The words seemed to echo in Rachel's mind as if the world around her had frozen. She remained silent, unable to process the information. It was as if everything she had lived up to that moment had been leading to this revelation. Michael, the man she had loved so deeply, had a son, and that son was now standing before her, alive, breathing, a part of him still present in the world. The confusion of emotions that hit her was overwhelming. Joy and pain, love and betrayal, hope and despair, all these feelings clashed within Rachel, leaving her breathless. On one hand, she felt grateful to have found a part of Michael still alive, something she had never expected to find. But on the other hand, the shock of discovering that Michael had an unknown son devastated her. How had this happened? Why had he never mentioned Jacob? What did this mean for their relationship? As Rachel's mind spun around these questions, a crucial detail finally surfaced, bringing a new layer of shock. Jacob was 8 years old, but she and Michael had only been together for 3 years. This meant that Michael had this child long before they met. The impact of this realization was devastating. Michael, the man she loved and trusted, had lived a life before her, a life he never talked about, a life that was now right there, in the form of an 8-year-old boy. How is this possible? Rachel finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. Michael never mentioned having a child. He was with me the whole time. How could he hide something like this? Samuel took a deep breath before responding. I don't have all the answers, Rachel. But the fact is, somehow, Michael had this child before you two met, and Jacob is here now. What we know is that Jacob's mother died during childbirth, and the boy was placed in the orphanage shortly after. It's possible Michael never knew about Jacob's existence, or there could be more to this story than meets the eye. Rachel shook her head, still trying to absorb everything. The idea that Michael could have had a child without her knowledge was almost unbearable, but she also knew that there were many things that could have happened without her knowing. Michael's past had always been a bit vague, with parts of his life he rarely discussed. The weight of responsibility began to fall on Rachel. What would she do now? Jacob was an innocent child, not to blame for the past, and now she knew he was the son of the man she loved. What did this mean for their future? Rachel knew she couldn't ignore the connection she felt with Jacob, but she was also aware of the moral and emotional implications of this discovery. How could she explain this to him? How could she understand and accept this new reality herself? Rachel spent the following days in deep introspection. The pain of the imagined betrayal, the joy of finding a part of Michael still alive, and the uncertainty of how to move forward left her emotionally exhausted. She knew she needed to make a decision, but every option seemed loaded with consequences she wasn't ready to face. As she reflected on all this, Rachel also wondered whether she should tell Jacob the truth. He had a right to know, but how could she explain to an 8-year-old that the man he never met was his father? And more importantly, how would this affect their relationship? In the midst of all this emotional chaos, Rachel decided she needed more time to process everything. She needed to understand herself, her emotions, before making any definitive decisions about Jacob's future. But one thing was certain, she could no longer ignore the bond she felt with him. Jacob was a part of Michael, a part she felt she had a responsibility to protect and love. The days that followed the discovery of the relationship between Jacob and Michael were filled with intense emotional turmoil for Rachel. She began visiting Jacob more frequently at the orphanage, trying to build a relationship with him. However, each interaction was marked by a mix of affection and doubt. Jacob, with his innocent nature, began to grow attached to Rachel, seeing in her a figure of comfort and security. He greeted her with a smile every time he saw her, unaware of the complexity unfolding in Rachel's thoughts. She, on the other hand, felt increasingly torn. There were moments when she looked at Jacob and saw only a child who needed love and care. But in others, she saw in him the reflection of Michael's secret, a past she never knew existed. With each visit, the dilemma of whether or not to tell Jacob the truth grew inside her. How could she explain to him that the man he never knew was his father? And how could she handle this truth herself when she was barely able to accept that Michael had a life before knowing her, a life that now stood before her in the form of an 8-year-old boy? Rachel's nights continued to be haunted by dreams of Michael. In one of them, Michael appeared beside Jacob, smiling at her as if he were at peace, but without saying a word. She woke up with a sense that time was running out, that she would soon need to make a decision. Finally, Rachel realized she couldn't keep living in this uncertainty. Jacob deserved to know the truth, and she knew she couldn't keep hiding it from him, no matter how painful it was. She decided that her next conversation with him would be crucial. But first, she needed to find the right words, something that tormented her because she didn't know how he would react. Their relationship was growing, but for Rachel, the challenge of telling Jacob the truth loomed like a constant shadow. She knew that the revelation would change everything, and the fear of losing the bond they were beginning to build was overwhelming. But deep down, she knew the truth had to be told. Only then could she begin to rebuild her life and help Jacob understand his. The morning was clear and calm, but Rachel's heart raced as she prepared for the conversation that would change everything. She knew that day would mark a before and after in Jacob's life, and in hers too. The weight of responsibility for what she was about to reveal was almost unbearable, but Rachel knew she couldn't delay any longer. Jacob deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. Rachel picked up Jacob from the orphanage and took him to a nearby park, a quiet place filled with old trees that offered shade and a bit of privacy. They sat on a wooden bench, and for a few moments, Rachel watched Jacob play with a fallen leaf. He seemed so innocent, so unaware of what was coming, that Rachel almost lost her courage. But then she remembered the dreams of Michael, the silent smiles and gestures that seemed to encourage her to move forward. She knew she had to do this, for Jacob and for herself. "Jacob," Rachel began, her voice gentle but firm, "there's something very important I need to tell you. Something about your past." Jacob looked up, curious but not worried. He trusted Rachel, felt safe with her, and that made Rachel even more determined. "You know I care about you a lot, right?" she continued, lightly touching his hand. "I know, Rachel," Jacob replied with a shy smile. "I like you a lot too." Rachel felt a lump form in her throat, but managed to continue. "Jacob, I want to tell you about your father. Do you remember asking about him before?" Jacob nodded, his eyes now focused intensely on Rachel's. She took a deep breath and pressed on. "Your father. He was a very special person, and I loved him very much. But he's no longer with us. He passed away before you had a chance to know him." Jacob's expression gradually changed from interest to confusion and finally to sadness. He said nothing, just watched Rachel, waiting for her to explain more. "Your father's name was Michael," Rachel revealed, her voice trembling. "And he was my fiancé. We were together when he died. I only recently discovered that you are his son, and that's why I started getting closer to you. I wanted to get to know you better because you are a part of him that's still here." Jacob remained silent, absorbing the words slowly. Rachel could see the internal struggle in his eyes, the confusion mixed with the pain of learning that he had a father he never knew, and that this father was gone. After a few minutes that felt like an eternity, he finally asked, "So, you were going to marry him?" Rachel nodded, feeling tears welling up in her eyes. "Yes, Jacob. I loved your father very much. He was an incredible person, and I know he would have loved you very much too if he'd had the chance." Jacob looked down, his small fingers nervously playing with a leaf. "Why didn't he ever meet me?" Rachel took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I don't know all the details, Jacob, but I believe your father didn't know you existed. Sometimes, life is complicated, and things happen in ways we don't understand. But I know that if he had known, he would have done everything to be with you." There was a long silence between them. Rachel didn't push Jacob to respond, giving him the time he needed to process everything. Finally, he looked up at Rachel, tears streaming down his cheeks. "What now?" he asked, his voice trembling. "What happens now?" Rachel felt her heart tighten, but also a wave of love and protection wash over her. She moved closer to Jacob, hugging him gently, allowing him to cry on her shoulder. "Now, Jacob, we can move forward together," she said, her voice calm and full of love. "I'm here for you. And if you want, I want to be by your side as your family." Jacob nestled into Rachel's embrace, letting the tears flow freely. Gradually, the confusion and pain gave way to a quiet acceptance. He didn't understand everything that had happened, but he knew Rachel was there and that she loved him. That was enough for him, at least for now. With time, Jacob began to accept his new reality. He still had many questions, but he knew Rachel was there to help him find the answers. The bond between them grew stronger, not just as a memory of Michael, but as something new and genuine, based on the care and trust they were building together. Jacob's adoption was officially finalized on a clear and sunny morning, marking the beginning of a new chapter in Rachel and Jacob's lives. The judge spoke the words that made legal what was already forming in their hearts. Jacob was now officially Rachel's son. As they left the courthouse, Jacob's shy smile reflected both joy and a bit of uncertainty, while Rachel held his hand, feeling a mix of relief and responsibility. But as Rachel would soon discover, life together would not be without its challenges. Despite all the affection they were beginning to share, adjusting to the new reality brought up questions and insecurities neither of them was fully prepared to face. Jacob, although happy to finally have a mother, still felt the absence of a father figure. At 8 years old, he was at a stage where having a father seemed crucial. The questions about what his life would be like if Michael were present or how he would have related to his father became frequent. Rachel did her best to fill that void, offering love, support, and patience, but she knew there was a limit to what she could do alone. Rachel, in turn, faced her own internal battles. The grief for Michael was still a constant presence in her life, a silent ghost that accompanied her at unexpected moments. Every time she saw Jacob smile, the way he furrowed his brow when he was focused, or the sparkle in his eyes when he talked about something that excited him, Rachel was reminded of Michael. And while that brought comfort, it also rekindled the pain of loss. Balancing these emotions with the role of being a mother was challenging. Rachel found herself trying to juggle mourning with the need to be present for Jacob, to be the mother he needed, while also honoring Michael's memory. Sometimes, the weight of these responsibilities overwhelmed her, and she wondered if she was doing enough, if she was being fair to Jacob, to Michael, and to herself. But despite the difficulties, there were moments of pure joy, moments when the new life they were building together seemed full of promise. Rachel and Jacob began to create their own traditions, like movie nights, park outings, and dinners that, although simple, always ended with shared laughter. These small routines helped cement the bond between them, creating new memories that, although different from what Rachel had imagined with Michael, were just as precious. Still, the ghosts of the past hadn't completely disappeared. Rachel knew there were many unanswered questions about Michael's relationship with Jacob's mother, about how he could have had a child and never mentioned it. And from time to time, these doubts resurfaced, bringing uncertainties about the future she and Jacob were building. But over time, Rachel began to accept that the past, while important, shouldn't entirely define her present. Michael would always have a special place in her life and in Jacob's, but what mattered now was what they did with the time they had together. Jacob, for his part, also began to understand that although his biological father wasn't there, he could still have a loving family and that Rachel's presence in his life was something to be celebrated. And so, gradually, Rachel and Jacob began to find a balance. Together, they faced the challenges that arose, learning from each other, making mistakes and successes, but always with the certainty that, despite the shadows of the past, they were building something new and beautiful. Difficulties still arose, of course, but now, instead of seeming like insurmountable obstacles, they were seen as part of the journey they had chosen to take together. And, step by step, day by day, Rachel and Jacob began to realize that the new beginning they were creating was stronger than any ghost from the past. The morning was fresh, the air carrying the soft aroma of flowers beginning to bloom with the arrival of spring. Rachel and Jacob walked side by side through the cemetery in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. In Rachel's hands, a bouquet of white lilies, Michael's favorite flowers, while Jacob carried a small arrangement of daisies, simple but full of meaning. When they reached Michael's grave, Rachel stopped, taking a deep breath. Visiting the cemetery had become a part of their lives, a way of keeping Michael present, not as a shadow from the past, but as a loving memory that connected them. Rachel knelt down slowly, placing the lilies on the grave, her fingers brushing over the name engraved on the cold stone. Jacob, more reserved, stood beside her for a moment before stepping forward and placing the daisies next to the lilies. He was still young, But he was beginning to understand the importance of these rituals, not just as a tribute to the father he never knew, but also as a way to solidify his new identity, his new life with Rachel. "Would Dad be happy to meet me?" Jacob asked, his soft voice breaking the silence. Rachel smiled, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. "I'm sure he would, sweetheart. And he would be very proud of you, just like I am." They stood there for a few more minutes, in comfortable silence, each lost in their thoughts. Rachel felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. The pain was still there, like a scar that would always be present, but it was no longer an unbearable burden. Instead, it had transformed into something gentler, a memory that, although sad, also brought comfort. After a while, they moved on to another grave, where Rachel placed a small bouquet of white roses in honor of Jacob's biological mother. This ritual, which they performed annually, had become a way of accepting Jacob's past, honoring the woman who brought him into the world, and acknowledging the path that had led them to that moment. "She would be proud of you too, Jacob," Rachel said, holding his hand. "And I'm grateful to her for bringing you to me." Jacob didn't say anything but squeezed Rachel's hand, a gesture that spoke more than words. They stayed there for a few more minutes, letting the gentle breeze carry away any remaining sadness while the tranquility of the cemetery surrounded them. As they left the cemetery, the sun was already beginning to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows along the path. Rachel and Jacob walked together, side by side, the silence between them now filled with understanding and acceptance. When they reached a small lookout point with a view of the city below, Rachel stopped, looking out at the horizon stretching before them. The future was still uncertain, full of challenges and unknown moments, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. "We're ready for whatever comes, right, Jacob?" Rachel asked, looking at him. Jacob looked at the horizon, then at Rachel, and smiled. "Yes, we are." They stood there together, watching the sun set as the city lights began to twinkle in the distance. That moment, simple and peaceful, symbolized everything they had achieved together. Rachel realized that, despite all the suffering and losses, she had found a new reason to live in Jacob. They had created a new beginning, a future where they could honor the past while also embracing the possibilities yet to come. And so, hand in hand, Rachel and Jacob turned toward the path ahead, ready to move forward together, facing whatever the future might bring. There was no more fear, only the certainty that together they could overcome anything. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who might need a reminder that new beginnings are possible even after the darkest moments. Make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter or any other inspiring content. Your support means the world to us. And if you've ever had a moment when life seemed to take an unexpected turn, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your story. Together, we're building a community where hope always finds a way.